What if the real power in America isn't in the White House, Congress, or even Wall Street, but in an institution most people barely understand? It doesn't print headlines, but it does print money. This is the story of the Federal Reserve, how it began in secrecy, gained control over the nation's money, and quietly shaped every boom and bust for more than a century. At the dawn of the 1900s, America's financial system was a mess. There was no single currency, no stability, and no central authority. Over 20,000 banks issued their own banknotes, and every few years, one financial panic after another sent the country into chaos. The worst came in 1907 when markets crashed. Depositors rushed to withdraw their savings, and the entire banking system teetered on the edge of collapse. There was no federal agency to save it. Instead, one man, financier J.P. Morgan, personally stepped in, using his own influence and money to coordinate a private rescue of the U.S. economy. That moment made one thing clear: the country needed a central bank, but no one wanted to call it that. The idea of a central bank had a long and bitter history in America. Early in the nation's life, both the first and second banks of the United States had been shut down amid accusations that they gave too much power to wealthy financiers. The word central bank was practically toxic, but by the early 1900s, industrialists, bankers, and some politicians believed the economy couldn't survive without one. In 1910, a small group of powerful men secretly boarded a private train from New Jersey to a secluded resort on Jekyll Island, Georgia. They used fake names and told even the train staff they were on a duck hunting trip. In reality, they were there to design a new banking system for the United States. Among them were Senator Nelson Aldrich, representing the powerful banking interests of New York; Paul Warburg, a banker from a prominent German family; and executives from J.P. Morgan's and Rockefeller's companies. For over a week, they worked behind closed doors to draft what would become the blueprint for the Federal Reserve. When they returned, the proposal was introduced in Congress, disguised under a new name, the Federal Reserve Act. It was marketed not as a central bank, but as a federal system that balanced regional and national power. Each region of the country would have its own Federal Reserve Bank, supposedly to prevent control from concentrating in Wall Street. In 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act into law, forever changing the American financial system. So what exactly did the new Fed do? It became the Banker S Bank, the place where commercial banks kept reserves and could borrow money in times of crisis. It was also given the power to issue the nation's currency, what we now call the U.S. dollar. Over time, that authority grew. The Federal Reserve began to set interest rates, influence inflation, and manage the nation's money supply, powers that would once have belonged to Congress under the Constitution. The Fed was designed to be independent from politics, meaning neither the president nor Congress could directly control it. But that independence also made it unaccountable to the public. Its board of governors is appointed by the president, but many of its most important decisions are made by unelected economists and bankers behind closed doors. Throughout the 20th century, the Fed's influence expanded dramatically. During the Great Depression, the Federal Reserve was blamed for tightening credit and worsening the collapse. In response, its powers were strengthened to better manage the economy. During World War II, it helped finance the war effort by buying massive amounts of government bonds. Then, in 1971, President Richard Nixon ended the gold standard. And with that single decision, the dollar was no longer backed by gold but by trust alone. From that moment, the Federal Reserve could create money almost without limit. Since then, every major economic event, from the inflation of the 1970s to the boom of the 1990s to the crashes of 2008 and 2020, has been shaped by the Fed's policies. When recessions hit, the Fed lowers interest rates and floods the system with money. When inflation spikes, it raises rates and pulls that money back. It's a delicate balancing act that affects everything from mortgage rates to the price of groceries. Supporters say the Federal Reserve keeps the economy stable and prevents the kind of chaos that once plagued the 19th century. Critics, however, argue that it concentrates too much power in the hands of a few unelected officials, and that its ability to create money out of thin air devalues every dollar in circulation. Some even question whether it truly serves the public interest or the financial elite that helped create it in the first place. Whether you see it as a stabilizing force or an invisible empire, one thing is certain: the Fed,